Today's video is going to be a little bit more off the cuff. It's not scripted or anything. It's just my free flowing thoughts on The Lord of the Rings, The Third Age. It's a PlayStation 2 and original Xbox game. I believe it came out in 2005. It's also kind of like a turn-based RPG, so it's got these JRPG elements to it. But the main reason why I wanted to talk about this game, so I started playing it a couple of months ago again. You know, usually I revisit this game maybe once every 1 or 2 years, but I've kind of walked away from this game with a bit of a different impression this time around, and I think it's because I'm looking at video games with a bit more, I guess, of an objective mindset, or trying to, you know, take notes and literally write things down as they happen and go, oh, what was this? And you know, the reason why I walked away with a bit of a different impression is because with this game specifically, this is probably one of the few games that I have a lot of nostalgia for, and I feel like nostalgia plays a really large role in our opinions and perspectives on consuming media, and, you know, basically like reflecting back and being like, oh, fuck yeah, that was like a really awesome movie, or this is like an awesome game. And then you revisit it a lot of years later, and then you're just like, oh, maybe this wasn't as good as I thought. I know I definitely have those opinions about, say, the first Avengers movie. I went to go see that movie in the cinema when I was 17 with my friends. Objectively, like, it was the first of its kind. It was an ensemble movie, and it was like a plan that was like 4 years in the making, and it was massive, right? And there's still some genuinely good moments in that movie, but looking back, I'm just like, oh, yeah, this isn't as good as some of the other movies in this saga of movies. When it comes to nostalgia, I don't think there's necessarily like a straightforward point to it all, but I definitely think that it's just an interesting topic to dive into. I think before talking a little bit about nostalgia, I'll talk a little bit more about this game specifically, give a bit of a brief overview, and then just kind of go through what I like and what I don't like anymore about this game. So I believe this came out, like I said, roughly around 2005. You know, I'm not even kidding when I say that I'm pretty sure I would have still potentially had like dial-up internet back then. That's how far behind I was, especially living in Australia. We're so far behind even today when it comes to internet speeds, at least. I remember walking into a Big W with my mum. I don't know if that store is international at all. It's kind of like a Kmart. I don't know if that's international or not, but anyway, I saw this game on the shelf. It had like the Balrog, it had Gandalf, it had 3 random Lord of the Rings people that were like no-name people on it, but it looked really sick anyway, and it was a full-price game. I'm pretty sure from memory it was like $45 or $50, which is crazy because that's like half of what video games are now, at least. But mum was like, yep, cool, I'll get it for you. And I think that's a big part of why this game's really special. We've never really been able to afford like full price games back then, so this is the first time I you know, had a game that I could really cherish. So the general overview of this game, the story at least, is that it's essentially one game following all 3 films, and your main characters are kind of like no-name characters, or just random people that weren't in the movies, but the game is like, oh, yep, this ties into the movies kind of thing. And if I'm to tell you what the story is, I don't know if I can, because I don't even think this game knows what the story is, because you start off as this Gondorian Berethor. He's getting attacked by some ring wraiths. He's then rescued by this elf lady called Idriel, and they kind of hit it off, and I think he's trying to catch up with Boromir. She's being cryptic, the elves are being cryptic. They're like, oh, you found him, and I don't even know exactly what that means. I think she was tasked by Gandalf to look after him, I think, because later in the game, it's randomly advised or brought upon us that Berethor, has been inflicted by some curse by Saruman. Then that curse is lifted. Then there's something with like the Witch King, I think. It gets really convoluted. Also, there's this whole memory loss thing in the story, which is kind of interesting as well, where it seems like Idriel and Berethor are like they're hitting it off, and then later on in the game you meet another party member called Morwen, and then he's hitting it off with her, and then she's just like, I'm from Rohan, and then at the end of that chapter, in chapter 5, she's like, oh, actually, I'm from Minas Tirith, and it's just like, what is going on in this game? How could you forget that crucial information. But anyway, I'm getting too ahead of myself. Idril and Berethor are like, cool, let's catch up to the Fellowship. They run into what I would assume is EA trying to combine Legolas and Aragorn together to make Elagast, which sounds a lot like Legolas. In my head anyway. And he's like the ranger from the north. But he's like this archer and this tracker, and it's kind of like they use lines or tropes from the movies, and it's just so corny with his tracking. And they do this a lot with the game in general. Like, they'll just kind of like throw in weird movie-isms to make it kind of seem Lord of the Ring-ish, but it just feels really out of place. Or your companions will come across people from the movies and you'll interact with them, and then it's just like weird dropping a line, or we're saying something to try and set them up so that way a line can be taken straight from the movie, so that way they didn't have to try and afford getting all of these actors back. and like that's fine. Like, they did that with like Rise of Skywalker when Carrie Fisher died, and I think they did it really good there. But here it's just like you're talking to Aragorn in the stables, and then he's just randomly like saying lines from the movie, and you're just like, what does that have to do with our conversation? What does that have to do with anything? But anyway, you've got 3 people in your party now, and you know you're killing orcs, you're killing wargs, everything's great. And then you come across Elagast's dwarf friend Hadhod, and then you guys kind of just travel through the next 4 chapters without meeting any new characters, as in party members. And then you meet both of your last party members in chapter 5. And I would argue that's way too late, because I've played most of the game now with just these 4 characters, and I feel like I've gotten myself in this groove where I'm leveling them all up quite evenly, and I would even argue that they're significantly overpowered compared to the level that you receive your new characters at. And I feel like the 2 new characters, Morwen, the indecisive twin axe chick, and the horse rider from Rohan, Aedan, I think they're just kind of like an afterthought, because they're not really given, even when it comes to like equipment and armor and all that shit, it's just like, I don't know, I just feel like it's just kind of like the 4 companion show plus 2 random people. That's kind of like a bit of a really quick summary of the characters, I guess. The character building's paper thin, and they kind of just flip what their motivations are, or like what they remember or what they don't remember, like on the flip of a dime. I don't even know if that's how the saying is said. It's just constantly changing, and that's why it's really hard to just kind of like follow what the story is. But I will say, at the time, being like a 10-year-old, I didn't give a shit. I just wanted to play the game, and I thought it was really cool that they were trying to tie in this narrative where they're just like following the Fellowship and trying to catch up to them, or you're basically, they've kind of written you in so that way you can help out with these large-scale battles. With these 9 chapters that are in the game, each 3 of them are following each movie. So, you know, for example, like chapters 4 to 6, they're basically all set in Rohan. You know, you're basically like, you know, chapter 4, you're rescuing elves, you're trying to catch up to the Rohirrim. Chapter 5, you're basically mustering the armies of Rohan and basically freeing the Snowborn village from Grima Wormtongue. Chapter 6 is Helm's Deep, which is so much fun, to be honest. It's like basically just one big battle. I think this game is really, really cool and creative when it comes to trying to tie your characters into the story. So, you know, again, another example. Chapter 2, you're in Moria, and there's the scene from the movie where Pippin accidentally knocks that corpse in the bucket, like down the well. You're actually basically straight underneath where they are in that tomb, and you hear everything, and the corpse just kind of like drops down in front of you, and you're like, oh shit, we must be near. Stuff like that I think is a really nice touch, and it's really, really good. But I think what actually shines is the turn-based combat. And I think it's going to be like a pretty big turn-off for a lot of people because, you know, gross turn-based combat. But I really like it, which I find really ironic because I always found like the Final Fantasy games a bit just fucking weird when I was growing up, and I never really got into them. I've tried dipping my toes in like Final Fantasy 13 and Final Fantasy 7 remake, and I'm just like, oof, yeah, I don't know, I just don't think this is for me. But again, I just don't think I'm nostalgic for it, and I think that maybe the Final Fantasy series is something that is driven by nostalgia. But anyway, we'll cover that in a little bit. The combat in this game is great because you're not in an open world environment. I would say that the maps feel pretty large for back in 2005, I think, when this game came out on the PlayStation 2 and Xbox. You're basically on this mostly like linear path, and you're trying to traverse each of these chapters, and obviously each of the landscapes are quite different. There's also, I think this game does a really good job at trying to recreate certain set pieces from or sets from the actual movies. Like, again, in chapter 2, the rocks where the Fellowship are resting, and like Frodo and Gandalf are talking, again, you can kind of see that Gollum is kind of close behind them. That's all there in the game, and I think that's really cool. But when you're not wandering around, you're in combat. So you don't just go straight from walking to fighting. It's not seamless. It's like a little announcement, like screen pops up kind of thing, and then your party is in combat mode. And you can only, I think, have a max of your own party is 3 people at max. Sometimes you can have like a guest fighter, like, it could be like Gandalf, it could be Aragorn, it could be someone from the movies, and that's when you're in your set piece battles. But the thing that I really like about this game is that with the turn-based combat, this is the first time I've ever seen anything like that in a video game, and I think that's why I was just like, oh shit, this is really cool. I actually kind of have to think on who I'm targeting or what abilities I want to use. Again, I haven't really played too many like JRPGs or anything like that, so this might be common, but something in this game that isn't quite common, in my opinion, or from what I've experienced, is that what you actually use, like your abilities that you use, is what you end up leveling up. So it's not like you level up overall and then you can just unlock something in a skill tree. That's not how this works. Each character somewhat has 2 skill trees. I'll just call them skill trees. And I'll use Berethor as an example because he's kind of like the main character. Berethor has swordcraft and he has leadership. If you want to, for example, level up your swordcraft ability, so I believe he starts with 1 and it's called I think it's like Guardian Strike. And if you use Guardian Strike 10 times, you'll unlock the next ability, which I think is like Shattering Strike. You don't have to keep using like a certain ability. It's just as long as you use the abilities in that skill tree, that's how you're going to unlock the next potential ability. Some of the characters, in complete honesty, some of their skill trees are just shit. And that's just how it is. Like I think with Hadhod, for example, I think his Axecraft is really good. Like there's a lot of high damage like abilities, but then his Spiritcraft, so he's got a lot of like fire-based elemental moves. I think a lot of them are okay, but they require a lot of gameplay to unlock the next ability, if that makes sense. You can also go into a menu and you can essentially pick and choose like what the next ability is that you want to unlock for that character. So if there's an ability that you don't particularly like or are interested in, you can just skip that overall. So there is somewhat a bit of freedom with how you want to play the game. And not to mention, every time you level up, like, you play a match or you fight someone and you get experience for it, you can level up overall as well. And you can use those points that you get from leveling up to invest it in certain attributes. It could be like health, it could be accuracy. Definitely recommend looking at accuracy because later on in the game, it just gets unfair how brutal it is when you're basically just always missing attacks. That's actually a little bit of a complaint for me because it doesn't feel like it's difficult. It just feels annoying because, some of the chapters, you just go from like one chapter to the next and there's just this massive jump in difficulty. The enemies hit way harder, their health is way higher, and they always dodge. And you're just like, well, fuck, what am I going to do? So there is that. You travel around in these somewhat linear worlds and you can collect armors, weapons, enhancements or enchantments, I should say, like elf stones for your party. You can craft items and heal. There's so much that you can do. It adds a certain layer of complexity to a very basic game. It's not overwhelming. It's really straightforward, and I feel like the way it's laid out in this game is really accessible to pretty much anyone who hasn't really played this type of game before. Like, again, I was 10 and I've never played a game like this before, and I somewhat got it straight away and I was obsessed with it. Obviously, it's an older game, so trying to play it on a newer console like the Xbox 360, I mean, obviously I know it's not a new console anymore, but you know, it's obviously newer than the original Xbox. There's a couple of glitches, like if you're walking around the world and you see a chest, if it's been unopened, like a point of interest, the whole screen will actually just flash. So it's kind of helpful because you can actually see where the chest is, but it does kind of get a bit annoying, I guess. But then also on top of that, I believe this only happened a couple of times, like in the Helm's Deep chapter, or there's one specific point where you're in Minas Tirith in chapter 8 and you're pretty much on the rooftops, and I think you're like in this throne looking area and you're fighting the Easterling warriors. And you also fight the Witch King at one point on his Nazgul, and the screen is just cutting in and out with shadows and it's just black and you can't see jack shit. And I think obviously it's just because I'm playing on a console that it's not originally meant to be on. But that was just a couple of things that I noticed. I don't think there's necessarily much more to say about this game. I definitely feel like I remembered it being a lot more special than what it actually is. I think it's honestly an anomaly that this game even exists, because looking at EA's track record with releasing video games, especially in recent years, but just the type of game this is, I just wouldn't think it would be commercially successful. And in all honesty, I don't know if it is or not, but it's just such a random game, especially considering that just a couple of years prior there was the Return of the King game and the Two Towers companion games, and I felt like those games are really good, like kind of like hack and slash games. And yeah, this game is just completely different, and I think that's what I really liked about it. I've always thought this game was really awesome, even, you know, when I bought it again in 2019, because I was like, oh fuck yeah, I just remembered that this game exists. But it's only recently that I'm playing it, I'm just like, oh, I don't feel like I'm as blinded by nostalgia as I usually am. And I don't know whether that's just where I'm at with my life at the moment, working full time, playing these games, you know, in my spare time. I know that I'm definitely gravitating towards playing like older games or games that I used to play, or games that I never got a chance to play that came out roughly, you know, like games I always wanted to play back in the day. I feel less inclined to just dive into new games now. And again, I don't know if that's like a general consensus thing or if that's just me. What I find interesting is that when I started playing the Assassin's Creed games again, I looked at it and I just think, fuck, like these games are actually really good. Like the first Assassin's Creed game, I felt like it was really bare bones, but I think it was ahead of its time. Assassin's Creed 2 just improved in every way, in my opinion. The other day, for some reason, I thought about like the first Borderlands game. I'm like, fuck, that game exists. And I used to play it all the time. So I downloaded it again. I actually finally finished it for the first time. And I was just like, fuck, this game was just so ahead of its time. Like, I think it's just like this looter shooter. And I feel like, you know, I could be wrong, but it's like the first looter shooter that I've ever played. Or I feel like it was one of the first looter shooters that were like on console back in the day, you know, before like Destiny and all that shit. I think there's this weird crossroad that I've kind of hit while playing The Third Age. There's nostalgia and you're playing a game and it's just really good and it's just genuinely and objectively just a good game. And then there's a game where you're like, oh, that's just not what I remember. And it's like, it's almost like kind of embarrassing as well. You're like, wow, why did I like this so much? Again, that could be just a product of where I'm at in life at the moment or whatever. But I'm genuinely curious to hear about what you guys think about if there's been a game or a movie where you used to think it was just the absolute bee's knees, and then you go back and you're just like, oh, no, that's just not as good as I remember it being. This game, like, I mean, I'm sure I'll revisit it again. It definitely holds a special place in my heart and, you know, with my memories. And, you know, like, I played the fucking shit out of this game as a kid, but I definitely think moving forward, it's definitely a game that I'm going to be revisiting less and less. And yeah, I don't know, it's just been stuck on my mind a lot for the last couple of months. I've definitely gotten sidetracked, and I wanted to be pumping out more videos after the second Assassin's Creed, and I thought, oh, this would be a really great game to revisit, because I wanted to kind of slot in another video in between each Assassin's Creed video, which, you know, this is probably the most fucking obscure game I could have picked, that I could have picked to put in between. But I don't know, it's just been on my mind a lot, and I thought, wow, like, this game just does not hit the same as I thought it would. Let me know what you think of this video down below. Like, if you'd actually consider playing this game, let me know what you think about it. If there's been a game that you've changed your mind on the older you've gotten. Yeah, thanks for watching this video. I'll talk to you guys in the next one.